time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go!
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Hello, welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod, and if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, welcome. This is a Star Wars podcast, if you haven't figured that out yet. We are going to be chatting about Jedi Battle Scars today, which is a novel that bridges the gap between Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, the two highly acclaimed video games from EA Respawn Entertainment, and the story and the adventure of the beloved Cal Kestis and the crew of the Mantis. And with me today, we have returning friend and guest on the Escape Pod, AJ. It's been a little while since we've had him on, so we'll bring him on in just a moment. And, just a heads up for anyone going forward in the episode, if you can drop us 5 stars, that would be fantastic. All right, let's get into it.
Another happy landing.
All right, here we are. That is the fantastic soundtrack done by Stephen Barton and Gordy Hab, who most recently showed up at Star Wars Celebration this past year to talk about their time composing the soundtrack for Jedi Survivor. And here we are. I'm in the escape pod with my good friend AJ. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yes, it's great to have you back. I keep bugging you to come on all the time, and here we are.
It's been
finally,
too long.
Finally, it has been a while. I think anyone who tunes into the Star Wars Escape Pod fairly regularly might remember your voice from the not the last book review that we did. It almost happened, but it was maybe a couple book reviews earlier. It's a couple of years ago. Do you remember which one it was?
I do not.
No, it was before Brotherhood.
Yes.
No, I can't remember which one. Anyways, you're here. You're back. Second time, right?
Yes.
Second time. I think we had you on when we had Ian on.
Yes.
Yeah, and I forget which one that was for. It's bugging me now. All right. Well, Jedi Battle Scars. This novel is written by Sam Maggs and was released March 7th, 2023. So this was actually released before the video game sequel came out. And its intention is to bridge the gap between the first game and the second game. So that's partially kind of what we're going to be talking about, as well as just some things that I picked up on. I highlighted a few things. We both read on ebook, so
Yes.
I've got some highlights there. And also just some character moments, and in general, just how we found the story, and then we'll give it a Pablo points or Poodoos at the very end, which I might need. As I always do, I will explain exactly what our ridiculous rating system is here on the podcast to anyone who's new. But off the bat, I think what I'll do is I'll read the description for this novel, so that those who haven't read the book can kind of get the idea for what it's about, but spoilers for anyone who plans to read the book, and you don't want to be spoiled. You might want to stop the podcast here. So forewarning, and minor spoilers for perhaps for the game as well, minor. But we're gonna keep most of that discussion for next week when we do the full review for Jedi Survivor. So. That kept in mind. Let's get into this. Cal Kestis has built a new life for himself with the crew of the Stinger Mantis. Together, Cal's crew has brought down bounty hunters, defeated Inquisitors, and even evaded Darth Vader himself. More importantly, Marin, Seer, Grease, and faithful droid BD-1 are the closest thing Cal has to a family since the fall of the Jedi Order. Even as the galaxy's future grows more uncertain by the day, with each blow struck against the Empire, the Mantis crew grows more daring. On what should be a routine mission, they meet a stormtrooper determined to chart her own course with the help of Cal and the crew. In exchange for help starting a new life, the Imperial deserter brings word of a powerful, potentially invaluable tool for their fight against the Empire. And even better, she can help them get to it. The only catch, pursuing it will bring them into the path of one of the Empire's most dangerous servants, the Inquisitor known as Fifth Brother. Can the Imperial deserter truly be trusted? And while Cal and his friends have survived run-ins with the Inquisitors before, how many times can they evade the Empire before their luck runs out? Pretty well-written synopsis, I should say. The cover of the novel features Fifth Brother prominently on the front. That is, if any of you need to know, it's he was actually most recently depicted in live action by Sun Kang, so the Fast and Furious Han actor, and he made his debut in Star Wars Rebels as the animated guy with he's got the triangular hat, the greenish skin, the lizard-looking eyes, and he's apparently, this book actually kind of beefed up his character a little bit, which I really appreciated that part of the novel. Just off the bat, before we kind of go into the nitty-gritty things, would you say to anyone who might just want a little tidbit right now, to read this book, would you say it's like, before we kind of get into it, would you say it's a must-read, a kind of mediocre, like, could read, or a skippable don't read, just so that we don't waste anyone's time here,
Yes, for sure. I'd say that the story was fairly enjoyable, but it could be a lot better in my mind. There were some enjoyable parts, and it kind of helped fill in some of the gaps between the two games, but I don't know, there are some things that they took creative liberties with, and I just wasn't a huge fan of.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no Star Wars book is perfect. That much is clear. I personally think this was a mediocre, don't need to read it kind of book. This was definitely for those people that, might want to really get invested with this particular side of Star Wars, because Star Wars is so big. Mm-hmm. It can be, in a way, thought of as a mythology that could be segmented into different little sections. Some people are really into the Mando stuff, and so their big thing is rewatching Mandalorian every week, and doing Book of Boba. They're looking forward to Ahsoka and all those kind of New Republic shows, right? Like on our Discord, we have our chats are now separated into era sections. So maybe that's that's their era of choice, right? This is the dark times, so there's not a whole lot happening, at least in the canon so far. I mean, this book takes place before the second game by a few years, but it's definitely in a period of time where there's not a whole lot of stuff right now. The second game overlaps that of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but this book doesn't really overlap any kind of big staple Disney Plus item or anything like that. So in some ways, it's definitely a bit of more of a niche area to kind of be exploring. But if someone is a huge fan of the Cal Kestis games, then maybe it's the book for you. Maybe this is the kind of book you want to pick up and kind of further read into this character. I remember when they did the first game, they did a comic series called Dark Temple or something like that, and they did it was about Seer and her master, who they were doing some sort of kind of treasure hunting something or another. I feel like was it called Dark Temple? I can't remember. Let me just quickly Google. Yeah, Dark Temple. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. No, it's no, never mind. Yeah. No, it's not called. Is it called Dark Temple?
Jedi, Star Wars Fallen Order. Jedi Fallen Order, Dark Temple.
It is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going crazy.
Nope.
All right. Sweet. Yeah. So it's a mini series that was done up, one issue. Sorry, never mind. There was a couple issues. There was a second issue and a third issue and I think a fourth issue. So yeah, it was a mini series and it was primarily featuring Seer. Oh, actually, there was a fifth one too. Yeah, 5 issues total. So you can get the whole thing in like a trade paperback at this point. It's been out for a while, but I thought it was interesting that with the second game coming out, they did have once again another released piece of literature that kind of tied into the game somehow. So between the 2 games, you also have that comic book series and this novel. So this part of Star Wars is kind of slowly expanding, and there are whispers that the third game is underway and in pre-production and kind of steamrolling forward to create a trilogy of games, which is pretty neat. But yeah, I think let's get into some nitty-gritty stuff here, and I'd like your opinion on kind of everything that I've run through. So here we go. Okay, so in chapter 2, all right. Little quote that I'll read. Cal grabbed the stim canister from midair, jabbing it into his other arm without thinking about it too hard. Nobody liked needles, but Cal hated them, especially after a bad experience with a rabid Dianoga. So I thought it was kind of funny that in the game you are constantly using stims, right?
Yep.
And I thought it was a really smart decision to actually put that as an element in the book, because no other Star Wars book really has that constant like stim, continue fighting sort of aspect about it. But this book really took the gameplay and kind of made it part of his story. Like, this is just how he fights. Like, he relies on stims a lot. And so, like, it was cool to me that they actually put that in the book, because I thought that would be something that would be overlooked, thinking that it's a kind of a game mechanics thing and it wouldn't really do too much. But like, you've read a lot of Star Wars books. Yeah. So like, it's not something that comes up a whole lot, right?
No. You definitely don't see that coming up much at all in any other books. They just fight on their own power. They're not using stims to try and give themselves a boost or anything like that. So yeah, that was a neat add-in, that kind of like a nod to the gamers that are reading this book. Just like, hey, we know you do this a lot. Let's just add it in here as a flavor.
Yeah. It was a cool little extra, little added extra there, and it was pretty consistent through the book too. All his battle scenes tended to have a small stim moment in there, so that was pretty neat. In chapter 3, there was a bit of a reference callback to General Grievous. As we know, fans of the Clone Wars will know that General Grievous went to Dathomir and wiped out all of the Night Sisters.
Yes.
And this was a story that has remained true to the first game as well, when we first meet the character Merrin. And she doesn't trust Cal at all, because she doesn't know the difference between General Grievous and a Jedi wielding a blue lightsaber, just as General Grievous does. So that was part of the reason why she mistrusted Cal for the first moment they met. But this book actually did a callback to General Grievous, and it really did do a lot for each character. They got into the heads of the characters and kind of explored a little bit of kind of why they're in this fight.
Yes.
And I thought that was a valuable aspect to this book, and a lot of the little kind of things that make each of the character what they are, as why they're fighting the Empire, why they're doing what they do, is part of the reason that flows really nicely into the second game, when you find all these characters in different places, right? So that was for me, that was a bonus to kind of get a little verbal reference to that character. You're a big Clone Wars fan too. Did you like seeing like those references and those little things that kind of call back to Clone Wars a little bit?
I did. Yeah. That kind of, it's nice when authors are trying to tailor their stuff to a wide variety of people. So everyone that watches the Clone Wars, they hear that and they're like, yes, I remember exactly when that happens. So it was just really nice that they had that. And also speaking to all the character arcs that they had and like point of views from different characters, I thought that was a really great framework that they can take moving forward. Because I like a lot of like big fantasy series, and they're all like different point of views from the characters. So you get a wider view of the place that they're at. So just like that was what I thought was really great about this book, was them just going with point of view from everyone's different kind of side. So you can hear like, okay, this character thinks this character thinks that. They're all happening at the same time, and they just kind of really intertwined and weave that in masterfully. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed some of the choices that they made. I wasn't as much of a fan of, but I feel like this is a good step in the right direction for where they can take their storytelling in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. Yeah. Chapter 4, there was a verbal kind of mention to a ship called the Thai Brute, and we don't need to comment too much on this, but I thought it was a nice little Easter egg that they snuck it in, because Thai Brutes were those weird looking TIE fighters that were chasing down the Millennium Falcon in the movie Solo. On the Kessel Run. So if you weren't sure what those are, those weren't actually TIE bombers, those were TIE Brutes. And there was once again an appearance to them in this novel, which does actually, you know what? I think I might be wrong about the overlap with this novel. I think it actually might kind of happen in the same time frame as Solo, believe it or not. So yeah, that was kind of a nice little kind of visual camo to have, as well as the planet Hosnian Prime, which is the same planet that blows up in Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Yes. That's where they set up the shop, the New Republic. You know, the New Republic Senate sets up shop on Hosnian Prime at some point between Episode 6 and 7. And then the First Order blows up that planet. So these characters actually visited Hosnian Prime and resupplied there or something like that. It wasn't, I don't think they lingered there too long, but yeah, it was kind of cool to have that little planet pop up too. Seer is a character which has been, I found Seer an interesting character in the first game. You know, we have kind of come to realize more Jedi have survived the Purge than I think we all originally thought. Yeah. You know, she is easily, in my opinion, at this point in time, probably one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, because, you know, not only does she survive an encounter with Darth Vader, but really, I mean, just, you know, the game goes to show, and then so does this novel as well. Like, she's a very skilled Force user, right? Mm-hmm. And she's also a very kind character. So this book actually reveals that at some point between the first game and this novel, she sold her own kyber crystal in her lightsaber to pay off Grease's debt. The thing that, you know, the kyber crystal, you know, Grease thinks, this little piece from the book, the thing that made her a Jedi Master, as far as Grease understood it, the heart of her laser sword, the shiny green soul of her powers, she sold it for Grease. And it, you know, it's kind of nice to see these little things that kind of make a character so much more wholesome in the book, mm-hmm. because they really do operate like a family. Yeah. And, you know, it's one of those Star Wars stories that if anyone's looking to get that same spirit, I think, of the original trilogy in a different time period slightly, mm-hmm. This is these games and this book and just the characters, they're all so different. And they all have their own little, they all have their own fight, right? But what makes them a family is them having come together to kind of try and do that together. And this book is unfortunately the story of how that begins to kind of unravel, which is where kind of the story leads into the game, into the sequel of the game. So really, people reading this book are going to have this yearning to play the game series, I think, you know, because believe it or not, some people might actually read this book and not play the games. Yeah. So that's definitely worth noting. You know, I don't expect a sequel to this book or a prequel, because the story is in the narrative of the gameplay. So, you know, maybe be prepared for picking those games up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Seer, you know, and just kind of the family dynamic and, you know, like what makes that is that what makes a Star Wars story special for you, or do you not look for that? And
I don't particularly look for that in my Star Wars readings, but I did quite enjoy that dynamic in this book. It just added like the little bit extra storytelling that they were able to do, and kind of really grounded Cal's character in that. As I think he says multiple times that he looks at this as his family, and like this is the first time he's gotten close to people in a long time, since prior to the Order 66, I think he said at one point in the book. So it's like,
yeah,
that was kind of cool. Like Seer as the kind of like the leader, so to speak, of the crew. Yeah, that was interesting. Cal's point of view was he was the leader, and he was trying to wrangle everyone of the crew and trying to keep the peace. But yeah, speaking to the Grease quote, I believe that was before or during the last game. So that kind of explained why Seer didn't have her lightsaber in the last game. So that was prior to the last game when she sold her Kyber crystal for Grease to try and pay off his debts, which ended up not working.
Yeah.
As we know in the book.
Right.
As they're always hounded by these guys.
To circle back to that family dynamic, I think it's also kind of important to know that the Jedi Code sort of prevents certain attachments, naturally, as we know from the films. But it is interesting to see a family like this, what you mentioned about Cal having said something about his, how he's never felt close to anyone since the Purge up until that point, is huge for a character like that to admit it, because he is a Jedi and he lives by a certain philosophy and a certain code and a certain way of living. And, to have attachments to anybody is whether it be romantic or otherwise is forbidden. Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why, Anakin's relationship with his mother was considered to be a risk when they took him aboard, because, even though that's not a romantic relationship, it's still an attachment. Right. And attachments lead to so on and so on. So there was an interesting part in the book where he actually talks to Seer about this, and there was a highlighted section here which I thought was cool, it's I think it's Cal who says this. Or maybe Seer, I forget. But it says, "But I don't know how to not care. And I don't know if the people, or if this galaxy is worth saving if there aren't people in it that you care about saving it for." And it makes a lot of sense, and like, I think what Anakin says in Attack of the Clones to Padme is that his argument is that they are encouraged to love because they're unconditionally, sort of encouraged to love others, right? And that's the whole point of kind of, I guess, being in a hopeful example to other people, So it's a fine line that they walk, right? And it's interesting to me that in such a dark period of time, like a family like this, for characters like that who have lost everything and everybody that they've ever known and cared about, is basically holding them together, in a time like this, and giving them something to fight for, right? So in a way, I guess it's kind of one of those things where, and the book doesn't give you an answer for it, and I think it's intended to be something that we all kind of keep wondering in our mind, like, are the Jedi always right? Is the code leading? Was it the code that led them astray, and or was it the politics, or there's so many layers to that discussion, and so it was very neat to see kind of that present itself in the book again to these characters. Yeah,
it was great to hear their interaction there as master and Padawan, and well, how do you navigate this? and they're both like come to the conclusion of, well, this is what it is. Let's try to make the best out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there is no easy answer to, oh, this is how it's done. It's like we're just gonna have to make this up as we go along.
Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting how they had that as their one of their moments together as master and Padawan.
Yeah. It's cool to see those moments because, of course, when you're playing the game, you don't always get those in-depth story moments, right? Yeah. There was a species that showed up in chapter 6, called the Amwadi.
Yes.
And I looked into this species because I couldn't recall what it looked like. And it turns out that the Amwadi is visually inspired by that of the holiday special when one of the Wookiees puts on the holographic VR unit and sees like a dancer with like pink hair or something like that, pink dreadlocks of some kind. Yeah, so that's the Amwadi apparently. And I thought any fans of the holiday special might go nuts for this little reference, this little Easter egg. Yeah. Chapter 6, little piece to read here. Once a member of the Alderaanian government, I fled once I realized that the Republic Senator Bail Organa was all too willing to become Imperial Senator Bail Organa. The royal family was never going to take a strong enough stand. There's a character that we meet in this book who he was once Alderaanian, and it was, or he or she, I totally forget now. I'm blanking on who this character was. Kiraris, or
yes.
Yeah.
The Amwadi.
Yes, the Amwadi. Yes. I'm forgetting their gender now. But the quote here was interesting because it was basically kind of implying that from their perspective, like Bale's actually like he was all too willing to be an Imperial Senator, whereas in actual fact he's just kind of like he's acting as a spy for the rebellion. But I thought that was a very, very interesting thing to note because I guess a lot of people would see it that way, right? Like he just kind of goes along with it, and I think like for someone who was so stubborn about kind of opposing all of Palpatine's stuff later in the war, and it was I guess it's an important thing to remember that not everyone knows the story that we know as the viewers. Like these characters in this world don't quite know everything that we know, right? Did you catch that little reference when it came up, or yeah?
I definitely saw that and I was like, oh, interesting. His perspective is Bale's just a sellout.
Yeah.
But I'm like, we all know that that's the furthest from the truth.
Yeah.
So, okay, Bale is doing something right if someone this close that was, I think he said he was a senator for the Alderaani, that he's like, no, I can't follow this guy because he's just a sellout.
Right.
But then we know that Bale is anything but.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things that just kind of, it comes up and you're like, oh yeah, it just kind of makes you think, right? Another Easter egg here, Edu, the planet Edu popped up. This is the planet which I think one of the characters was briefly held for a short period of time, where it's where they have to take the plans that, this piece of hardware that's being constructed as part of the plot of the story needs to be taken there to be analyzed or something or another. Anyways, Edu is the planet in which we see in Rogue One when Galen Erso is killed, his laboratory, when Jin and the crew of the U-Wing there go to rescue him, but in actual fact, Cassian Andor is, technically supposed to kill him, right?
Yeah.
So that's Edu, the rainy Rocky Mountain planet. Mercana also is another planet that showed up. That was a big one in this book. Most of the story, I think, happened on Mercana, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Close to it.
The first appearance actually was in Tarkin, and did you read Tarkin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't remember Mercana.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like once the planet's mentioned, you kind of forget about it when you're reading these books. But yeah, apparently it's the second time now that it showed up. And the fifth brother in chapter 7 showed up. Instead, over time, the Jedi had made him a servant servant to politicians. This chapter and this book really gave fifth brother a lot more backstory and a lot more just kind of juice to his motivation for being an inquisitor in the first place, right? Because as we know, they're all once force using Jedi. So I guess it's curious to me, like I find it a little curious that the reason why he's Inquisitor is because, you know, he just despises what the Jedi made him into. Obviously he had some political opinions that differed from, you know, the rest of the Jedi. What did you like about the fifth brother now that we know kind of so much more about him? You know, in this story now that we've got all this extra layer to the character.
It definitely gave like that extra layer, which was great. And I think what his problem with the Jedi Order is kind of what people are thinking. Like, oh, were they a slave to politicians? Were they just abandoning their cause of always being like the peacemakers because they're now tied to one entity? So they have to go along with what they say. So I think a lot of people will look at that and go, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, he's more concerned about how his reputation was perceived. Yeah, yeah.
Because it's like, oh, well, I'm now a peacekeeper, but I'm keeping someone else's peace. Right. So it's like they can't be that independent entity that I think he wanted. He wanted to be able to make his own decisions of the best that he knew, not be tied to any type of government entity or anything like that, and just trust in the Force and go with what it says. But then the council is like, no, you can't do that. You have to follow these politicians. And he's like, but how is that a independent or peacekeeping activity when you're tied to one entity?
Right.
So I think a lot of people will look at that and go, oh, maybe that's why the Jedi fell, is because they were so short-sighted, and we've got to be peacekeepers, but we're tied to this one entity.
Yeah, I think you know, and that was part of Palpatine's plan, is really try and like make them as you know, try and dump all the politics on the Jedi as much as possible, that people just started to see them less as peacekeepers and more of the war generals, that, you know, it's all their fault kind of thing, right? Yeah, it was interesting to see kind of like that be one of the reasons why he hates the Jedi so much, and kind of a reason for him motivated to try and kill them all, right? Clearly he's a bit fired up about it. I don't think the Republic awarded him enough days at the counselor. You know what I mean? All right, there was a little artifact that showed up in chapter 8 called the Circlet of Suresh. A little artifact, a Force artifact, which is supposed to enhance the Force user's abilities or of some kind. It was something that Seer was going on about. That very classic Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, Indiana Jones relic, you know, kind of aspect brought into these stories once more. Yes. That's always been very constant through any of these Jedi stories, is any of the, you know, whether it's Dark Temple or this novel or the two games, there's always kind of that treasure hunting, you know, like let's go like tomb raiding sort of thing, you know. Yeah, there's always something. Yeah. And this sort of element of the story kind of brought me back to that a little bit, because without it, I don't think there would be anything in regards to the treasure hunting aspect of this book. But yeah, the Circlet of Suresh, that's a KOTOR artifact apparently from the expanded universe from Knights of the Old Republic. The author Sam Maggs was a big fan of the games, so the story goes that she actually wanted to put a little Easter egg in there for fans of KOTOR. And I think you enjoyed KOTOR quite a bit, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you recognize it when he popped up, or are you kind of maybe just recovering the memory now that I've told
Recovering
you
the
about
memory
it?
now.
All right, yeah. It's some sort of like neck brace thing that goes. Yeah, it was described as a tiara.
Yes.
But the picture on Wikipedia makes it look like it's sort of some sort of kind of jawline bone thing that goes around the back of your head. So I don't really know like what exactly it's supposed to be, but yeah, the book described it as a tiara sort of shaped thing. So anyway, yeah, if we're fans of KOTOR, I thought, yeah, it's something that they might appreciate, and Sam Mag clearly a fan of the games. By the way, Sam Maggs is a fellow Canadian, so that's also pretty cool because we're from Canada. The chapter 13, Grease started to scream. The Inquisitor cuts off Grease's arm.
Yes.
So I know you haven't played too much of the sequel game, but now that you've read this moment, and you know that this character does show up in the game,
Yes.
obviously, because you've seen the trailers and everything like that. But yeah, anyone who has played the second game so far, or kind of wants to know why he's got a cybernetic arm in the sequel, this is the moment that he loses that arm. And it's kind of neat that story was able to be told in this book, because it's funny. It's been so long since I played the first game. I actually didn't even remember that he had all 4 proper arms beforehand. But I did recognize the fake arm, and I was like, oh, the prosthetic, that's... Did he have that before? And then I just never bothered looking it up. But yeah, when I read this, I was like, oh, okay. So this is a new thing. And it was neat that we got to see the moment that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was also nice about that moment, from my perspective, is in a lot of these Star Wars books, in storytelling, the good guys always win, and it kind of looks like there is no trouble to them winning, or they're able to easily overcome any challenges that are put before them. But then with the Mantis crew here, we see all of them try to go in and kind of hold this guy down,
Right.
Neutralize the threat, and it really is just like a last minute effort after 3 people have tried and failed,
Yeah.
that they actually succeed.
Yeah.
So it's just like, oh, they're kind of getting out of that trope of Jedi always win, they're invincible type of thing. But it's like, no, they actually can fail. They can lose.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just a big step for me in the storytelling, is trying to get away from that trope and kind of make it more realistic and kind of put the humanity back into them.
Yeah, I like that because the most innocent person on this team of people is Grease.
Yes.
I mean he's not, I would say, innocent in the way that like a child would be, but like he's got his issue, like gambling and debts, and so he's like he's lived life, right? But he's not exactly the one that's killing stormtroopers and going out and slaying down Imperial officers and stuff like that. That's all the work of Seer, Cal Kestis, and Marin, the Night Sister Witch. So I mean, he's really just kind of the pilot, right? And so to see him be the victim of the consequence of Seer's encounter with the Inquisitor, trying to save him, not just straight up killing the guy, as well as Cal Kestis's inability to defeat the Fifth Brother initially.
Yeah.
I thought was a really, like you say, just like a needed kind of story for this book, because the Fifth Brother has so far, in my opinion, always been a bit of a buffoon. And I say that only because I've only seen him mostly in Star Wars Rebels, and more recently in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show.
Yeah.
And and Blake and I are doing the Rebels Talk after show. Currently we've released 3 episodes for that. So anyone who's following Rebels Talk, side note, it's going to be a little bit before we have another part out, but we will get more of them out there. Just keep watching the show and then listen to those when they drop eventually. You might need to wait a couple weeks for part 4, but we're getting there. The thing with that particular character, when he first was introduced to Rebels, which I think was season 2 of Star Wars Rebels, It was just, he was one of those characters. Like, the heroes have always got to get away every week. There was no consequence when this guy showed up.
No.
You just knew that it was all going to be okay. And this book completely changed that opinion of mine with the character. I mean, I know it's a kids show, Star Wars Rebels, but like this book is definitely not written for kids in that sense, in that same way, right? So yeah, it was interesting to finally kind of get some proper action with this character and some real consequence and like some justification. I think really just like justification for the Inquisitors in the first place. Like they're not all idiots and they're not all like completely incompetent. Like they actually can survive and like, successfully hunt and track Jedi and sometimes in some ways like kill them as well. So this book really kind of put that into perspective a little bit for me as well. Yeah, for sure.
Because they're known as like the Jedi hunters and the Jedi killers. But then every single time before this, we see the Jedi having no problem defeating them, evading them. And it's like, but how?
Yeah, exactly.
How do they have that reputation if they always lose?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's confusing, right? So I just, it was nice to kind of see them actually struggle against this guy, In chapter 16, and this is the last thing I have on at least on my list. There was a little quote here which I'll just kind of read out. Your determination to topple the Empire stops you from seeing the good we've been doing in the moment. Even these small things, they've all helped. Even if we can't keep doing this forever, single-minded obsession is dangerous for a Jedi. Even good intentions can lead to the dark path. That's something that Seer tells Cal about his intentions to topple the Empire could be his downfall. And because it can become his obsession, right?
Are they foreshadowing?
And I have in fact finished the second game, and I'm not going to spoil anything. But I will say that this is a quote that plays very nicely into the second game. And for those of you who have finished the second game, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So it was definitely another little kind of area which I guess expanded upon these characters in a positive way and made the story all that much better and connective tissue between the two games and all that stuff. I'm going to talk about something that maybe we weren't such a huge fan of, but I think this is everything that we've mentioned so far, things that we liked, things that we noticed, things that kind of connect the two things, and we don't need to linger on this next thing too long. But I must mention, I'm not a big fan of romantic genre stories, and this particular one was really just not for me. In the book, there is two characters two new characters that get thrown into the story. One of them being this, as we read in the synopsis, this stormtrooper, who is actually in fact not a stormtrooper, but an Imperial wearing stormtrooper armor. And this person has a bit of a love encounter with Marin, the Night Sister, and this is a minor spoiler for the second game, but she's not in the second game at all, and the trajectory of Marin's relationship with Cal, which was budding in the first game, is continued in the second game as people would expect, right? So for me, this curveball in the novel was just kind of confusing. It took me out of it a little bit, and I just wasn't a huge fan of just about any of it. I feel like, personally, I also feel like the story lingered too much upon this ordeal. I know you have something to say on it as well, perhaps. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, they definitely, I think, placed too much or too strong of an emphasis on the relationship. I feel like the relationship was good for Meryl's growth and character development, but they didn't need to go that far or that deep into it, because, like she alludes to at the beginning of the book, she doesn't care what someone looks like. She doesn't care what gender they are. She just likes who she likes. So it's like, I read that and I'm like, okay, so I know there's something coming up that may not be, or may be atypical for Star Wars, any other Star Wars before now. So it's like, I knew that was coming, but I just didn't appreciate or like the emphasis they put on it because it detracted from the overarching story.
Yeah.
Added some to Marin in her development, but they could have still achieved the same goal.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the part of the reason that, and this is something we brought up earlier, is this book is also intended to be laying the foundation for a reason as to why the characters all go their separate ways before the next game, right? And so by the end of this book, Marin, who kind of comes to terms with being away from Dathomir and everything like that, she sort of finds the spark again to light her magic, her fire, you know, a little bit more strong than she was able to before. And I guess it has some sort of emotional connection to kind of like finding herself. In the second game, there was some dialogue exchange between Marin and Cal about her having gone off and explored the galaxy for herself, and sort of really through her travels and her helping people and doing what she can to sort of quench the anger that she has for the Empire, has really sort of, I guess, assisted in finding herself again in the second game, right? And that's also when it's revealed that she's got all these like next level powers now, you know, that you didn't really quite see her use in the first game. So this novel for me kind of like threw a bit of a wrench in that continuity, just a small bit, because now it's the added influence of this person that she meets, which has no mention in the game at all. You know, in addition to that, I feel like you say, the result could have been the same without this character, without this relationship entirely. You know, I feel like there was still a really good sense of where she was kind of throughout the book, that she was feeling sort of, you know, like not quite herself, that there was still something out there. She needed to figure it out. And, you know, I don't think this relationship quite kind of added anything. In fact, it only sort of confused my thoughts of the matter, having already played the second game. You, however, have not played the full second game,
No.
so your opinion is slightly different in the way that like that continuity doesn't yet exist in
my brain,
in your
yes.
brain. So I totally get that, but for me, it just didn't really work too well. The other characters, though, those all kind of fit very perfectly well with kind of the reasons as to how they're all different, you know, in different spots in the galaxy in the sequel. But yeah, that one was the kind of the one exception for me that just sort of, it's like, okay, it just felt a little forced. But you know, again, it's not for everybody. I'm just one of those people. You know, there's a time and the place, and I just thought this book, maybe it wasn't the right book to have something like that. But especially seeing as it is only 19 chapters, which is a weirdly short Star Wars book, because we've read Star Wars books that have very consistently been within the 27 to like 42 chapter mark. And this one is definitely on the lower, kind of on the smaller side. So I just didn't know if, like, I'm pretty sure there was an entire chapter in there which it was like dedicated just to Marin and this other character, Fret.
Maybe two
chapters
two
chapters total, which is a lot of space in the book. So I was like, okay, maybe a bit too focused on that through this whole ordeal, but the rest of it was all right. The rest of the story that they built for Marin here was pretty good. But did you have anything to add on that, or?
Yeah, I just loved her, to hear her internal struggles. I know that a lot of people have those same internal struggles of, am I good enough? Am I doing enough? Type of thing. Like, I've got to be strong. I got to protect. And just hearing Marin thinking, hey, I'm the protector of this group. But then also hearing from Cal, he thinks he's the protector of this group. and then how they have to are forced to work together and trust each other instead of one person just doing it. Kind of really added something to me for me. Just because it's like, hey, these two people think they're the same thing, but they're really not.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting how they were played off of that, being the protector of the group. And I think everyone kind of felt like they were.
Yeah.
Sierra always thought that she has to protect everyone and she has to come up with the best plan and just kind of from the background kind of protect everyone. But then Cal's like, no, I got to take the heat off of everyone. And Marin's like, no, I got to make sure no one can touch anyone.
Yeah. You know, and you combine that in a cocktail with all their separate reasons for fighting, what they're, you know, for doing what they're doing. And, you know, just in a nutshell, you know, Cal basically wants to put a dent in the Empire. Marin wants to avenge her Night Sister's deaths, and she can't take it out on the Separatists anymore, so the Empire will have to do. And then Sierra's whole thing is she wants to try and leave a legacy of the Jedi behind so that, you know, the future can benefit from their work. And then Grease, I'm blanking on why he's doing what he's doing. I think he's just kind of, maybe he just likes the company. I don't know. But
Yeah.
that one wasn't as clear.
No.
But yeah, you know, there is kind of like, there's a point in the book where they all kind of come to realize that they're all fighting together for separate reasons. And there's like a certain situation which kind of makes them realize like, oh, we're not really on the same page with any of this. And, you know, how on earth did we last this long? But we care about each other.
Yeah.
So like it makes it difficult, right? And so I love how the second game kind of picks that up, and you see these characters slowly kind of come back together again for you know reasons of the story. But it's kind of nice how this book sort of does lay some foundation for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You know, that being said, I think, you know, that's pretty much the book. And, you know, let's do some Pablo points or Poodoos, the main attraction of the evening. So, this is a rating system out of 7. All right. So 3 Pablo Poodoos is the absolute worst of the worst. That's 0%. Okay. Moving up from there, you got 2, 1 Pablo Poodoo, and then you got a 50%, which is Bendu. All right. And then you go into the positive range, you got Pablo points. 1 Pablo point, 2 Pablo point, 3 Pablo point, 3 being the absolute best of the best of the best, right? So my question to you, sir, is what would you give this Star Wars book?
I would give it 1 Pablo point. A little bit better than 50%, but could be a lot better. I feel like I've said, they've made a really great foundation for storytelling in the future. But the story in and of itself wasn't quite for me. It kind of seemed like they had taken some liberties that they didn't need to focus on something that they could have done a lot quicker and kind of added to character development in another way. Could have dove into Grease a little bit better.
Yeah.
Overall, still an enjoyable story. So that's where I land.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page. It was more than a Bendu, but definitely didn't get my 2 Pablo points. I would say 1 Pablo point. You know, if I were to round it off. But you know, it's I mean, it's a good Star Wars book. I wouldn't say it's a must read. But you know, it's in that territory where if you're invested with these characters, it's a good one.
Yeah.
And you know, I would say it gets somewhere in an A territory grade of being a good connective tissue to the sequel of the game. And
For sure.
you know, that being said, the third game of the trilogy is in pre-production. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this story plays out. I know you're going to head home and play the rest of the second game this week. And, you know, we're going to converse about Jedi Survivor on next week's podcast episode of Star Wars Escape Pod. And, you know, I hope to see you there. And otherwise, we've got a party of people who have recently finished the game. But thank you again, AJ, for coming back on the podcast. And, you know, we will we'll see you in another episode. I hope.
Sounds good.
All right, another book review
Yes. Or game.
or game.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right, and thank you all for tuning in to the podcast. If you need to get in touch with us at all for any reason, or just leave us a friendly comment, you can follow our Twitter at SW Escape Podcast, Instagram at the same handle. You can find us on YouTube as well with the same handle at SW Escape Podcast, and our email is swescapepodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send in a voice memo if you wish to leave some sort of voicemail. We love hearing from our listeners. Not that we get too many messages, but we do see you tuning into the show. So continue sharing the show with your friends. That always helps us out a lot. Like I mentioned before, those 5 stars do a huge amount of work to bump the show up in the search results. And that's what we like to see. Keep an eye out for those episodes in the future. And we'll see you next time on Star Wars Escape Pod. May the Force be with you.